from a plant side of it, the complexity, and with my job. And so I'll tell you a little bit about what I do. But before I do that, I want to introduce you because I have so many introduce myself to you because there's a lot of new faces, and so I wanted to just start with that. And I know Jeff did that. So this is Lori, this is Lori here, wife of going on 33 years, and I'll tell a story about her here in just a second. But this is our 4-pound 3-ouncer right here. So that's Mason, and then Matt on the right. And Mason's working on his master's in weed science towards a PhD in weed science at the University of Arkansas, and Matt's a mechanical engineer. And so my loving and supporting wife. So last week I was telling Jeff Harrison, her comment when after Jeff finished, she leaned over and she goes, "How are you going to follow that?" So, and I'll tell you one other story about that. So I was asked to preach last year, and so I called her up and I go, "Hey, Michael Lum texted me and he says he wants you to preach, and so I told him I would, and just a weak moment said, "Sure, I'll do that." And so she goes, "You mean Cody or Phil?" Or there wasn't anybody else available. So I just want you to understand the family dynamic and the support that I get on doing something like this. So to tell you a little bit about me, and I guess why I was asked. So I have a master's in weed science, and that used to be a far out degree, and now you go to Colorado and everybody thinks you're the coolest guy around because but I do have, it took a little while, but I do have a degree in weed science, and it's in agronomy, plant and soil science, and so it's an agriculture degree. I grew up in agriculture, and so it was a way to make a living and to still enjoy agriculture and not be as risky as farming would be. And so that's that's where I started out my degree. And so now I've worked for DuPont for 28 years. And then in 2017 we merged with Dow, an arch competitor in this space. And so now we're all in the same room. And so now I work for Dow DuPont. We're going to have a new name that they're going to tell us here in hopefully a few weeks. And so it'll be a completely new company. But so what I do day to day is I lead a team of researchers throughout the country. I actually lead 4 different teams, and some of them are all of them just about exclusively PhDs, entomologists, pathologists like Chris Metter, and weed scientists, and there's nematologists, and so it's science guys, or science guys and gals. And so the teams I lead, and they're new to me, I lead an urban pest team. And that's bed bugs, roaches, termites, and rodents. So weed science to that's a pretty good step, but it's pretty interesting. I mean, some of the things we're doing is around bed bugs. They want a sensor that when you come into a hotel room that it's telling you if a bed bug is in that room, period, but just by the pheromones that insect's putting off. So it's pretty remarkable. And then the other teams are turf and ornamental and range and pasture, and then an agronomic crop team. So that's what I do day to day, is just interact. So the phone can ring and we can talk bed bugs, or we can talk controlling brush, but it's a group of scientists, and what we're doing is it's really cool because we're taking something that chemists discover or that we purchase from other companies, and we don't know what it does or what it, we have no idea utility. And so it's needle in a haystack mentality. We're trying to understand, is this the next blockbuster herbicide, fungicide, insecticide? And so we take it from that point of not knowing anything to a product that a farmer can buy on the shelf. And so it's about a 8, maybe 9-year process, and we're sinking $250 to $300 million in the hole before we sell the first drop. So that's what my group does, is takes it from discovery into a commercial product. So it's an interesting process. The other piece of that is all those we're testing, it may be the next blockbuster heart drug, it may be, pharma, it's a molecule. So they don't come in and go, this is a herbicide, this is a fungicide. It's a molecule you know absolutely nothing about, and we characterize it. And we may screen, at one point we were trying to screen 750,000 molecules per year. Think about that per day, how many you're screening. We quickly realized that we couldn't do that and maintain accuracy. And so now we're back to probably 50,000 a year. So just divide that by 365. That's a lot of needles that you're trying to find. So that's what I do day to day. And it's really an interesting job. And I've been doing it quite a while. So what I'd like to start out and connect it back to our lesson today is just, if you go back to Genesis, I'm just going to step out here and read this just for a second, and we'll so in Genesis 3:17 through 19, it said, to Adam he said, because you listened to your wife, that's a whole nother lesson, and ate the fruit from the tree by which I commanded you, you must not eat from it. Cursed is the ground because of you, though you through painful toil you will eat food from all of it, all the days of your life. It will produce thorns and thistles for you, and you will eat the plants of the field. By the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. For dust you are, and dust you will return. So that's when it all began. And if you think about it, you know, the fall of man, I envision the Garden of Eden. I mean, there weren't any weeds, there weren't any insect pests. It was pure paradise. And so from this point forward, I guess job security for me, but I would much rather not have the job security and all of us being in the Garden of Eden. But that's where it all began. And through the Bible, throughout the Bible, it talks about thorns, and thorns are always negative. Thorns and weeds are interchangeable, a lot of, in the Bible, but it's usually a path, a rough path with thorns, or it's being whipped by thorns, or burnt with thorns, or intertwined. But it's always negative. I'm not aware of anything positive that comes from the path that we set on right here with the fall of man. And so that's where I'd like to talk about, just to kind of connect back to what I do. This is an example. That was an old world example, or 150 years ago or 100 years ago, of mule and plows. This is real world. This happens to be some work we're doing in Greenville, Mississippi, and this is rice. So if you've never seen rice growing, I put the seed heads there. But on the left, that's the toil. That's what we're faced with if we don't have the technology to grow the crops and to produce a crop. So that's what I do day to day, and that's just the same thing in insecticides and fungicides. So it's very rewarding when you can go to a farmer and create a crop like this, when if he did nothing, it would look like that on the other side. So just kind of connecting it back to what I do. So, all right, so I want to ask some questions. These are very relevant. These are good facts to know. So this isn't something that you'll walk out of here and never want to remember again. So some of these are pretty easy. So we'll start out. So what's world population today?
7 billion.
7 billion. All right, where's it headed to in 2050? 9 plus 10, you hear it. So one of the commands that I put up there is in Genesis 9:7, and be fruitful and increase in number. We've got that one down. I mean, we are doing that. I mean, we're doing a great job. But with that, I also brought up the verse in Matthew, the Great Commission. And that's our role with all of these people. I hope we see lost souls and the ability to, or the desire to get out and reach out and share Christ and convert and bring folks to heaven with us and to truly share that. So with that number, it's a big number, but a big opportunity. So next question is, what percent of your income you think is spent on food in the U.S.?
It's like
20?
It's nothing nowadays,
25%?
25%.
30. 30.
30?
I'm going to say less.
Less?
15.
Oh wait, it's 10. It used to be 25.
Right.
It's nothing.
6.4.
Yeah. It used to be
6.4% of your income. So I want you to think about it too. 6.4, go to the other extreme. Nigeria, 59%. If you woke up today and everything you did, all your work was just to eat, 59% of your income. That's the reason I put it up there. I want you to just understand what's neat about my job is we're working to feed the 9 billion. But also we're working to keep this number, get this number as low as we can throughout the world. The lower we get it, food security is important. If you don't have food, you can't do anything. And so that's the other thing that's unique about what the area that I work in. How much of our food supply is lost to pests, diseases, insects, on a worldwide basis each year?
12% or?
We got 12?
20.
20? All right, we'll keep it rolling. 20 to 40. Say a third. So if you can solve this problem, the food's already being produced, it's just being lost to diseases, storage problems and all that. So, so you're just building a puzzle here that the way you can impact society. And then last one, just a trivia, crop yields in the last 100 years, and I'll tell you can look at those. So just say 100 years, 18 bushels to 175 bushels for corn, 10 to 52 for wheat, 122 pounds for cotton, 892, and 212, and then hay, 0.93.
That's per acre.
Yeah, and so that's just showing the productivity. So, and the goal of what you want to do is maintain the land use at the same, and you don't want to increase productivity, because the other option is just to farm everything and tear everything down, all the forests and everything, and just so that's just a picture of pretty cool of what we're doing around feeding the world and driving productivity. All right, we're going to get to the lesson, and I'm going to make sure that. So I put this picture up here, and this is a corn plant, for those of you who don't know corn. Big crop in the U.S. I mean, a lot of it growing. I put a diagram, and if Lori teaches third grade, by the way, and that may be something that Lori would put in a third grade class or a science book, and it looks really simple. It's not simple, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. So you look at all the different pieces, and they're all different. They all have cells like Jeff talked about last week. By the way, corn plant genes in a corn plant, 32,000, in a human, 20,000. So that's, you think we got, that was eye-opening. I didn't know that, but so it's a very complex plant. The thing about it, we pretty much understand the complete genome of corn. So we know where drought tolerance comes in, we know where herbicide tolerance comes in, so we're able to, and the genetic side is completely different than what I'm going to talk to you about today. So here, Jeff talked last week, I'm going to stand up just a second. Jeff's whole talk last week was mainly right here around DNA and RNA, that it comes out here in the ribosome. So that's a cell, and keep in mind, there's millions of cells in on a plant or in us. And they're different, so they're for different functions. The grain, the tassel, the roots, but all of them have this same function. And a plant, the only thing that's different really is a plant is have chloroplasts, and that's the green, that's the chlorophyll, and that's how we harvest energy from the sun. And so I want to take it from that simple picture now to get to this complex, a little bit more complex picture, and you can see all the different things. And you'll see that they're all working in concert. If you mess with one of them, then you've thrown the whole system out. And that's what I actually do. Our research, and Chris, we're trying to identify that one thing that can destroy the plant, a weed, and not destroy the crop. And we call that selectivity. So we want to do that. So I'm going to take it just a path. So if you look at that cell, this is the complexity of what's going on in each cell. Everything's going on at one time, 24/7, and to think that came about randomly, that it evolved. And I'll give you an example, and I'm going to talk about Roundup. We all know Roundup. The shikimate pathway right here, all Roundup does is one enzyme in this one pathway, and the whole plant collapses. It cannot, because it can't produce these aromatic amino acids, it just dies a slow death. So when you look at how complex, and to say that just evolved, or that just, everything in there is dependent on everything else. And so, like I say, my job, you look at an insect, it's a different system, but that's what we're trying to do with insecticides. We're trying to just find one thing that we can disrupt that system and control the insect without controlling other things and mammals, and have safety to mammals. So I put that up just to understand the complexity. And so in my job, and what we do, and this just happens to be herbicides, these are all the different ways that we're trying to disrupt that system. So we're trying to, you look at some of these things, some of them we mess with photosynthesis, and the plant dies a quick death because it can't, sometimes we're messing with the cell wall, but our chemists and our biologists, and they're hanging different groups on things, and they know exactly how these things are going to behave, so that you can start and disrupt the plant. But the point that I just want to get back to is just how sensitive that system is and how complex it is. So it's not something that you know, when you look at the simple corn plant, you say, well, that's simple. You know, light comes in and sugar comes out and CO2. It sounds so simple. But when you dive into it, there's just, you know, no telling how much time has been spent trying to explain what goes on in that cell at that level and all the different metabolic systems. So anyway, just hopefully you understand or see how complex creation is and what a delicate balance that we have. And so I'm going to, you know, we've all tried to connect it back to what we do. And so what you've heard me explain, so this happens to be a herbicide, you know, explanation, but what we're trying to do with a herbicide, this is a target, it may be an enzyme pathway. And our herbicide comes in and locks into this pathway right here. When it does, it keeps that plant like Roundup, you know, when I was telling you that. When it locks in right here and Roundup gets in here, then this pathway can't continue and it goes to here. The other thing that you know, so that's just kind of a model of how it works regardless of pathology, you know, insects, whatever. This is the path we're on and what we're trying to do. And we can do it different ways, but ultimately that's kind of a general explanation. The other thing that happens that plants do is they adapt. And so we spend much of our time fighting resistance. So you see it with antibiotics, and you see it with herbicides, insecticides, it doesn't matter. You mess with that system, and eventually it's going to adapt. And that's completely different than evolution. It's just adapting to a different environment. And this is down here explains some of the ways that it can adapt, but you see how that target site changes with that plant. And when it does that, then no longer, you know, when Roundup comes in here and it tries to connect, it can't. And so the plant survives. That's the other way that we can do things. You've heard of Roundup Ready crops, where you can spray Roundup over the crops. That's what we've done genetically, is allowed that so that target's not there, and the herbicides are metabolized. So not to get too deep in the weeds, but so and this just got that trouble. Anyway, all right, good. A little quicker next time. Herbicide atrazine. So this is how it works. If you look on the left here, that's pigweed and corn. On the right is clean corn. All we're doing with atrazine is disrupting the photosynthesis, and creating chaos in there, free radicals, and it's a quick process because once you quit producing energy over there on the right, and you're trying to produce sugar in photosynthesis, then once you disrupt that, it just totally destroys the plant. That's a quick death, and that's when we use, you know, when we use that herbicide, that's what it looks like. And I mentioned Roundup, and we kind of talked through that earlier, but it's just that one enzyme over there, EPSP synthase, that glyphosate binds to, and when Roundup binds to that, the party's over. It's a slow death because what you've done is you've interfered with the aromatic amino acids, and so you're not making proteins, and so it just slowly, they need those amino acids, and it's a slow death. So that's why when we see some herbicides, they're quick, some are slow, it depends. Some you starve the plant, some you just create so much chaos in the plant. So that's kind of the science part of the lesson today that I wanted to share, and I put this picture back up here just to kind of bring us all back around to understand complexity. And, you know, you can say, I can look at all that complexity and say, yeah, I can see how that could evolve and all this. I see no way, and I deal in science every day, and that could happen. It just doesn't make sense if you just tweak one little thing, and to think that all of those pathways evolved and created a plant, you know, it just, I can't comprehend it. And so, you know, as I studied science in college, it just, every time I saw this and I opened that book and, you know, plant physiology, it just validated that there is a creator, and this had to be created. And so that's, you know, just my personal thoughts on it. Any comments or questions on that? Or just, okay. So what I do, you know, just the low-hanging fruit and the easy hit here is parable of the weeds. You know, sower. You know, that's, you know, in the Bible, you know, I have examples of weeds, and so I had somebody reading. I think Jeff Harrison. Would you read that for us?
Mark chapter 4, verses 1 through 8. Again, Jesus began to teach by the lake. The crowd that gathered around him was so large that he got into a boat and sat in it out on the lake, while all the people were along the shore at the water's edge. He taught them many things by parables, and in his teaching said, "Listen, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants, so that they did not bear grain. Still other seed fell on good soil. It came up, grew, and produced a crop, some multiplying 30, some 60, some 100 times."
Okay, thank you. So in this example, I'm sure we've probably all studied this at some point, this parable. The seed, what is the seed in this particular parable?
The gospel.
The gospel, the word of God. And then as you go down through, it talks about the soil. Anybody have, what would be the soil?
The listeners.
The listeners? The heart? Yeah, the heart. But yes, so your heart is the soil. But what I want to focus in on is just the seed that fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plant so that it did not bear grain. And then, so there's two things that are going on here that I see just on the weed side of that. So as a weed scientist, and we're all, by the way, you will be ordained as weed scientists when you leave today. The competitiveness piece of that. So if you look at what the goal is to produce a crop, and that's no different in the farming world. You want to profit and you want to produce a crop. So you're multiplying some 30, 60, and even 100 times. So you have that competitive aspect, and we've got to understand that in life. What are those competitive things? And we'll get to that here in a second, because I'll give you a heads up. I'm going to ask you about those. And so before we move forward, I want to read one other, and then we'll have some discussion about it. So, Patrick, do you have that one?
Yes. Matthew 13,
Yes.
verses 24 through 30.
Uh-huh.
Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servants came to him and said, "Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from?" "An enemy did this," he replied. The servants asked him, "Do you want us to go and pull them up?" "No," he answered, "because while you were pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at that time I will tell the harvesters, first collect the weeds and tie them in bundles to be burned, then gather the wheat and bring it to my barn."
Okay, this is a little bit different. So what are we talking about here? The seeds that were the good seed. What are we talking about there? It's a little different. Talking about the sons of God,
yeah.
the Christians, us that have been sown. And so then it goes down through. So this is a little bit different context, and you got to see it a little bit different. Then it talks about that the weeds being, where did the weeds come from? So what would the weeds be in this case? If we're the sons of
non-Christians.
What's that? Yeah. So it's a whole different context, but it gets back to the same thing, of that understanding your environment and knowing, the previous one was around your good soil, your heart, and that piece of it, your personal side of that, and your growth and producing that crop. And this one, it's understanding that everybody's not on the same page, and that God's going to take care of that. But it also tells me to have your radar up around, in that mix. And so you've got to really be aware of the weeds and in your life, and to understand those environments, and being next to are challenged by those folks and pulled into that side of society. So a few more fun facts, and I want to get back to the profitability or the productivity. So just some fun facts. When in the Bible, it's several times it's used of growing a crop, and we're compared in parables. So it's not a one seed. I plant one seed and I harvest one seed. That's not the example God's given us. God's, when he talks about 30, 60, 100 fold, and I just, these are rounded numbers, so, so plus or minus, but one corn seed eventually in that one plant will turn to 500 to 700 kernels. So that's productivity. One seed that you plant is turned into 5 to 7. A wheat seed, roughly 60 to 90 kernels in that head, a head of wheat or plant once it tillers and does all that. So 60 to 90. And cotton, I looked at it a little bit differently. Of all the cotton that's produced in the U.S., only 1% is used for seed to replant. The rest of it's used for cottonseed oil and for feed and all that stuff. So only 1% is used to get it started, and then it grows from there. And so I think that's a really important lesson of our expectation from Christ, is that we're not here to, it's not a 1-to-1, and it's not even a 1-to-4 in my case for my family. That's ultimately, initially that's what you want. You want your children to be solid Christians and to move on and to build that foundation. But God's challenging us even more than that to plant that seed on that 10 billion, and to be out there and let him make it grow. We're going to plant it, we're going to water it, and we're going to let him make it grow. But understand that our challenge and our command is to grow that crop. And I'll bring it back, and I'll reread it. In Mark, we read it earlier, Mark 4:8. Still, other seed fell on good soil, and it came up and grew and produced a crop, and some multiplied 30, some 60, and some 100 times. I've underlined good soil, and that's what we talked about, that being the heart, and that's true. And you've got to, in these crops, you've got to put them in a good environment. And that's one thing, as I live my life and I go through and I travel a bunch and I'm around a lot of different people and a lot of different environments, that we in our personal life we've got to watch the environment we put our heart in.
Amen.
And you cannot, even though you say I can handle that, I'm bigger than that, you stay away from that fire. And so you go to the good soil. You go to and surround yourself with solid Christians and people that build you up and raise the bar for you. And it gets back to that second parable of the weeds, is if you're hanging out in a bad soil, I don't care how solid you are, even if you're producing, you feel like you're doing this up here, if those two aren't in concert, the good soil and what you're producing, then you're really probably not producing what you think you're producing. So your heart's got to be right, and you need to plant yourself in an environment that's right. All right, so I told you all this is your test, and I'm going to tell you this is to become weed scientists. So a good weed scientist understands the competitiveness of weeds in our lives. So that's basic weed science. So just quickly, what are some things that compete with us in our Christian walk? Top of mind.
Technology.
What's that?
Technology.
Technology.
Busyness.
Busyness.
Materialism.
Materialism.
Jobs.
Absolutely.
Peers.
What's that?
Peers.
Peers. So this could be but you've got to understand the competitive. You've got to understand what's going to interfere with that crop 30, 60, 100 times. And the goal is to make a profit. And that profit is joy. The Bible tells us what comes from all of this activity is joy. And so we've got to first understand the competitiveness. The other thing that I put in here is understand the destructiveness of weeds. And you've got to understand what you're dealing with. And it can totally, if you remember the rice crop, there's zero harvest there. Where, when I showed you the new Dow DuPont product, there's nothing there. You don't even put a combine in there because it's zero. And so you've got to understand the destructiveness of the weeds in your life and take it very seriously. And sometimes those weeds are people. And so you got to have your radar up around that. The other thing is to understand the command to reproduce as part of our Christian walk. And we've talked about that, to grow and to reproduce and to make that crop and to multiply. And that's not multiply as people, but multiply as Christians. And then finally, understand the multiplier effect that we are instructed to have. So those two are kind of connected, but we want a big multiplier. And it's not counting numbers, it's just continually planting. And you don't worry about the crop. You just plant, and you plant it in good soil, and you do everything you can to grow that crop. And it's not a comparison. It's just do your job, and the harvest sometimes takes a long time, and it's a long summer, and it's a lot of things going on, and there's drought, and there's all kinds of things happening. But in the end, you got to understand we're here to multiply our effort as Christians and to share the good word. And then finally, I'm going to bring it back around, and this is loosely tied, and I'm going to step out here where I can read it. I'd like to wrap up with this, and I love James, but in my mind, it brings a lot of what we talked about together is growing a good crop. My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because the human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word that is planted in you and which can save you. So as I read that, I see the weeds. I'm looking there and I say, hey, I see the things I need to get rid of and pull out of out of my crop, and how I need to grow. But ultimately, it's that word that's planted in us, and that we need to continually fertilize that, and fertilize it in ways like we're doing today, and study, spend time in the Word, and to truly honor God with our lives and the way we live, and just have that passion to truly be a weed scientist when it comes to your spiritual life. So 10:14 and 15 seconds.
You did good.
Comments. I really would like some comment and feedback if you have time or have some thoughts.
I had a thought when you were saying that you constantly have to look at plants because they find ways to resist whatever you've given them, that, Satan, he comes at us a certain direction and we go, oh no, I see you, Satan, I got that covered, and he doesn't just give up though. He finds another avenue to attack us.
That's good. I wish I saw that before I taught the lesson. I'll add it. Chris?
I just was going to say, the whole idea of planting seed, that's something that's always, it's actually helped me a lot, because I used to, I shouldn't be this way, but I used to look at somebody and say, it's not going to work, right? So but the idea of planting seed and letting God make it grow, because it's not just the people that I impact directly, it's the people that they impact down the line that makes that 500 to 700 kernels. Exactly. And it's given me a lot of peace to know that I sow that seed and let God do the work. And not every seed's going to grow. Some of them are going to be in the weed, in the rocky ground or wherever. But it's my responsibility to sow the seed. And so that's really given me peace.
Absolutely.
Like the Matthew verse said about time, waiting and letting the getting the weeds out of the weed at the end of at the harvest. That God didn't give us holy Roundup to use. He's gonna get the weeds at the end. So. Like Chris said, we plant it whether we think it's going to grow or not, and then let him deal with it at the end.
Right. We need to worry about what we were instructed to worry about, and let God worry about what He said He'll take.
It might grow in the thorns and then come up later.
Exactly.
How many people does it take to make that kernel then be harvested? How many people are in that cycle?
Yeah,
you talk about the person that plants it, and it's the same way with us. Like we plant it, but how many people will touch that person's life down the road and do a little bit of watering, a little bit of fertilizing. Takes a lot sometimes.
Great point.
So did Dow create Roundup?
No, that's Monsanto.
But Roundup looks at one tiny.
Like one piece in that one system, one enzyme. Yeah.
So, man, that's pretty powerful. If you relate that to what Shirley was talking about, and the devil.
Right. Just
we'll look at one
weakness.
Tiny.
Absolutely.
And it kills the rest of it after that.
Absolutely. So, good points. I'll tell you one other thing, and as we wrap up, I want to just a good feeling. So we came together as a corporation, and I was at a meeting a couple of weeks ago in Charleston, and we had that question that we ask in here about science and belief and faith. Do they go together? We were in a group with 300 in an audience of new people coming together. We didn't know each other. You're bringing these two big companies together. And our new company started out, our leader stood up there And he said, we're going to give glory to God when we start this meeting off in a corporate environment.
Good for
And we
him.
started that meeting off with a wonderful prayer for everybody in that room. So I don't know if that's the tone for our new company, but that gives you a flavor of that science. You know, you hear that they're opposing, but when you see the real world and the real faces, and you pray over 300 that are, you know, that are on the same team in a science-based company, it's pretty impressive. It made me feel really good about the company that I'm a part of. All right. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Eric.